Hey, what's up? It's Tommy Walker with the Content Studio, and the best piece of advice I have ever gotten was you can chase rainbows or you can follow me.
Dude, I like rainbows. What's wrong with rainbows, Tommy? What is that great
Nothing.
advice, man?
Well, here's the thing. I used to work for this tech startup in the very beginning, years ago, right before my 21st birthday is when I left, um, and we had gone from a $1 million a year company to a $5 million a year company, and I was one of three marketing hires, and I was talking about leaving. And I had talked to the founder and had said, I think it's time for me to go. The company I felt like was losing its way a little bit. They had gone from like honesty, integrity, don't tell people what they need to hear in order to make the sale, to 100 people on a sales floor chanting money, money. And I said, I don't want to lend my superpower to this kind of culture, right? Like, I don't want to be a part of that. So when I talked to the founder, he had a Rolls Royce that he had bought, one of like three that he had bought during the time that we were together, and his license plate said "risk it." And I said, "Okay." Well, I decided that morning when I was kind of on the fence about it, I saw that and I was like, you know what, I'm gonna take that advice. And I told him that, and he said, "You can chase rainbows or you can follow me." I said, "I'm gonna go chase some rainbows," and
Hmm,
uh, and that was kind of the beginning of my freelance career.
that's interesting, man. So, do you really believe that working for yourself is rainbows, or did you have a little more plan behind it than that? Let's talk about that because I think that's really
Yeah,
interesting, man. You definitely have a content superpower. I mean, that's how we first connected, gosh, many
yeah.
years ago. Because I really enjoy your content. So talk to me about that, man. Is it really rainbows?
Sure. No, no, it was not rainbows at all. I had actually, when I left, I was going to start a music video company. I had made a couple of music videos before that because my first love was film, and I went to school for I went to conservatory for acting, growing up, and turns out there's not a lot of money in local bands. So I had tried really hard, and ended up losing everything at the time. So there were no rainbows to be chased at that point. But the idea was, you can follow your dreams and see if there's a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, or follow him. And I said no,
Yeah.
and it wasn't rainbows. There was no rainbows to be found. It was a lot of blood, sweat, and tears. A lot of tears. But yeah, eventually, I made my way back into the working for myself, after a couple year detour, and yeah, have built up to a pretty decent career since then.
That's cool, man. That's cool. Yeah, it's not my grandmother would say it's not all flowers and sausages,
Mm,
which I'm like, okay,
sausages,
I don't know what that means, grandma, but I'm guessing that means it's not all perfect. So
right?
I'm gonna guess that that's kind of what we're talking about when business. So with that, 10 years ago, 20 like 15 years ago, how did you realize, man, that content was your superpower, Tommy?
I didn't. I started off consulting. So when I first started, I was a glorified link monkey at the company I was at before. I was just building links and thought I was awesome at it. Um, and I had eventually moved into doing SEO originally for different clients, and was building up a bit of a consulting practice at the time, but it was more advisory. It was less hands on, and way more advisory. And I built my business up for about the course of 4 years, and had a very bad client at the time where we had one full payment, and then the second payment started to get split up, and then they got further and further apart. And um, and I had was in a very tough situation at the time because I had been working for myself for so long. I couldn't get a regular job, right? I couldn't get so much as a lead setting job at Home Depot. And things were bad. Like, we had my the engine in my car had blown. We were years, like, or not years, but we were miles away from civilization, from where we were living. My sister-in-law, who was like 17 at the time, was delivering, like, helping us go get groceries once a week. Like, it was a terrible situation. And this is where I kind of pivoted towards writing and creating content, like full time. And this is where, like, a lot of people started to I got that visibility. Um, Now, growing up as an actor, I was very entrenched in storytelling, world building, character development, improv. Like, a number of different storytelling related things. And when it came time to feed my family, I was out of options. So I decided to start blogging for dollars. And uh, what what looked like, somebody trying to get their buzz was really Tommy trying to get $200 here to pay an oil, or like $200 to pay oil, and another couple $100 to pay rent, and like a number of different situations. So a byproduct of survival, using words for a living and storytelling as a living, was building a bit of a name and credibility. But overall, it was really just a matter of survival at the time.
Wow, man. Wow. That's bananas, dude. So
Mm.
talk to me about, because that was a while ago. So what did
That
blogging
was,
for
yeah,
dollars
like,
used to look like, and like how does that change? How has that changed into the great content that you write today?
yeah. So I had written for a handful of sites, and then the big one ended up becoming Conversion XL, which is where I gained a lot more visibility. And I was writing for, it was a couple $100 a piece. And at the end of the year that I was writing for Pep over at Conversion XL, he had said, "Congratulations, you had the #1 and #6 most trafficked articles on the site." And I said, "Congratulations, you have yourself a new editor. Pay me a steady salary." But what the real thing behind that was growing up and having been in this world of knowing how to tell stories, having to tell stories, the developing characters and whatnot, and understanding what narrative is, right, overall. I never really viewed the screen that you and I are talking on right now very differently than TV screens or movie screens of the past. It's just a little bit more interactive. So understanding how the narrative structures work, and how storytelling as a whole worked, and then just applying that a little bit differently into this B2B, SaaS world. That's really where that started to happen. And then just building a huge volume of work helped make that come a lot easier, time after time. So, yeah, I hope that
Okay.
answers the question. I kind of go off
Yeah.
the rails sometimes. So, yeah.
Yeah, no, I think so, right? So I think so. So let's talk about that, right? So Conversion XL,
Yeah.
obviously, they want to talk about conversion. So
Hmm.
how does content help us get closer to conversion? Like, do you have any frameworks that you can share with us so that we can grok a little bit more of how important this stuff is?
I don't necessarily know about frameworks. I'm very much, you've got the planners and the pantsers, and I'm in the pantser category. I do a lot of my writing flying by the seat of my pants. But I have a personal content code that I use, and actually anybody I've ever written with, I send over the code. And one of the most important ones is, I think it's Rule 6: ask better questions. Um, and I think a lot of what makes good content, what we see a lot of in content marketing and just content space in general, are surface level questions, right? Surface level, this is the question you ask. This is the stuff that comes off the top of my head. It's very clear that I'm trying to make a couple $100 as a freelancer who's writing this stuff. And it's very easy to churn out. It's very just top of the head, surface level questions. And the major thing that I care about when I'm researching a piece and when I'm putting out this research, in general, and this is with not just Conversion XL, but with any of the blogs that I've run, is that, okay, I have this bit of research, but now I'm asking why. Like, why does this thing exist? What's the narrative that I'm going after here? And then how can I use this bit of research to ask a better question and bring it to the next narrative point and to the next narrative point until I've developed something that feels very thorough and one of the best possible pieces that can happen. And the other thing that I look at, uh, especially when it comes to this type of stuff, is I care more about behavior. Like when I'm looking at, developing content that helps people to either understand how conversions work or drive conversions for myself. Um, I try to understand the human psychology behind that. What are the psychological studies? Because if we're talking about human behavior, right, and behavioral sciences in particular, that didn't change from 1970 to now, right? We're still wired the same way we were, however many years ago. And if I'm looking at these types of evergreen ideas of how human behavior works, how even something as simple as visual information processing theory, right? Like you could get into that and how like simple websites are best for conversion and design, right? It's about understanding why that works and how all of this kind of plays into this experience that we're creating, not just this surface level words on the page, and that's that. So yeah, I don't know if that really talks about frameworks so much, but yeah, it's ask better questions.
Asking better questions, right, I mean, that is powerful, right? Going deeper than the surface certainly provides more than stuff you can churn out for hiring someone who doesn't do any research, who just,
Right.
here's a surface level article, right? What is insert topic here? Certainly needs to be defined, right? It certainly, we have to have some of that question, but to really get people to go deeper and to want to go deeper, we have to ask that why question. We have to ask,
Mm-hmm.
okay, so what, right? Like what does that matter? So you talked about, though, a simple website, right? Converting
Mm-hmm.
better, and but a deeper level of content. So talk to me about that, Tommy. Like, what do you mean by a simple website for those that are listening that might be unfamiliar with that?
Sure. So I actually I did an article on this at Conversion XL. It was one of my top performing articles, and the idea of a simple website um, follows things like prototypicality, right? What are we expecting from a site like that? Like if you look at e-commerce websites, for example, there's a lot of the same basic structure to it, right? You've got the hero image up top, you've got maybe 3 to 4 different product pieces right there, you've got collections over here, and there's this sort of understanding of what a e-commerce website looks like. And your brain is always going to try to make shortcuts. So the basic framework of an e-commerce website should be something that's familiar to your reader, right? And then you start getting into things like, what kind of e-commerce site are you? Like if you're a luxury retailer, there's a certain color palette and stuff like that people are familiar with, and you start looking at these languages and these shortcuts that people's brains associate with these types of websites, and then build in your own sort of branding and everything from there, right? You make it your own. Um, so simple isn't just a matter of like, black text on a white page. It's more along the lines of what are people expecting from something like this? And then how can you, either flip their expectations to a certain degree and make it unique, or how do you fit in? And not everybody wants to be a disruptor. Not everybody needs to stand out and be like the most powerful brand. You can just get by on being what people expect and then kind of moving on. So the idea of that, and then like you could start looking at things like typography and what's easiest to read, and stuff like that, right? Um, and one of the best examples I use in that when it comes to like the color theory and everything is there's a reason why action movies, right? You look at a bunch of different titles and posters for different action movies, and they all have the same basic structure to it, right? It's the red background and the like face. You know what I mean? Like I could say action movie poster, and there's an image that comes up in your head on what that looks like, and that's what I mean by like visual information processing theory, and how you get how you start to get people to expect a certain thing, and then over delivering from there based on what we know about that audience.
Wow. Wow. So, how long does it take you to write one of these epic articles, man? Because you've gone through now. Now I need psychology. I've got to understand
Mm-hmm.
design theory. I've got to. I mean, so how long does it take to create an article? And what's a typical, or what's a good return on that? If I'm thinking, okay, I'm hoping this actually works.
Yeah. So an article can take me up to 30 hours. It's a typical article when I'm writing can take up to 30 hours. And that's simply because I'm trying to process as much as I can and crunch all the information as I can ahead of time. What is the direct ROI on that? I don't really know. I do know that it gets me invited to, shows like this. And I know that it can really lead to a bunch of other things that feel a lot more organic and natural. But am I, and I can answer this question very quickly, but am I looking at a piece of content that I'm writing like on the blog, right, for a blog piece of content and going, oh, this is going to make me, X amount of dollars? No, because there's very few websites. There's no website that I've gone to and said, this article is fantastic. I'm going to buy after reading this one article. Now the focus shifts a little bit when you move into copywriting, right? And when you're looking at transactional pages, like my services page took me way longer to write because there was a lot more focus. How do you say what you do in 500 words, right? Like it's almost impossible. And it's that whole thing of like, I didn't have enough time to write a short note, so I wrote you a long one instead, right? It's that idea. And those have a lot more direct transactional value, but how people get there, how they build that trust in you, how all that goes, it's worth the time, but it's very hard to like quantify what that path to conversion is on my own, right? I've worked with data scientists who can figure all that stuff out. I work with a data scientist who figures all that stuff out. But yeah, I mean, ultimately, it's worth the time because it builds that notoriety, which makes the sale itself a lot easier. You don't want to become a guy; you want to be the guy, and that's ultimately what it comes down to.
Yeah. Wow. Absolutely. That makes sense. No, not direct ROI, but certainly some indirect, and certainly
Yeah.
with data science, we can track that a little more. So with that, one of the keys to content though is distribution. Like Google used SEO is not, it's still important, right? But social and social signals and getting it in front of the right audience is important too. So how do we do that now that there's so much noise out there, Tommy? How do you do that now, and help people to get more eyeballs on it so that they're the right
Yeah.
eyeballs?
Yeah. So the thing I care about now, and this is the question I've been asking because I'm starting a new content program with a new client, is what if Google didn't exist? One, first and foremost. Two, what Slack channels, private Slack channels, and private email newsletters am I going to be a part of, right, within a company? And then three, how do I let the content carry itself, right? And when I was at Conversion XL, actually, I was in charge of the social media there, but I'm not good at social media, right? Like there are people who are clearly, you're way better at social media, right? But if the content's able to carry itself, then it doesn't, like that part doesn't really matter. Now, getting in front of the right people can be just a lot of, you know, understanding your audience, who you want to be reading that. Rand Fishkin actually put out a really great piece on who will amplify this and why. It's very much about speaking to a very specific market, very specific type of person who might follow another person, and then thinking about social networks more as nodes, right? Each person is a node. And then if you think about it from like the graph perspective, how do you get in contact with the right nodes with the message that's going to resonate with them, who can then amplify your content? So it's actually way more focused. A lot of social media distribution, I feel like a lot of the advice is about going wide, and it's not. It's actually way more narrow than that. You get two or three of the right people amplifying your content for you, and then it's going to spread like crazy. I've had a handful of posts like go insanely viral. I watched one time with an article as it was moving through different time zones. The traffic was moving through different time zones and went around the world. It was crazy to see it. But it was really cool to watch at the same time.
Wow. Wow. So that's so interesting. You talk about, who's going to see it and how to make sure that it stands on its own if Google didn't exist. And I don't think a lot of people think about that. But to your point about like who's going to amplify it and why, that article that you mentioned from Rand Fishkin, here's if you know like who's doing that, you created this really cool video. I'm going to make sure I share it in the show notes, that finds like who's amplifying your competitors' information,
Right.
like who's doing that. So let's talk a little bit about that, Tommy. I'm not looking for you to rehash the whole video, but I'd love to talk a little bit about the theory behind that and how, like, some of the pillars of what we need to understand who's sharing our folks' info.
Yeah. So, and just a little bit of context behind what that particular automation is about is I'm looking at who's sharing my competitors' content by tracking their information, their URL inside a Twitter search. And then I'm creating an automation that adds the people who are sharing that to a list on Twitter. And when I'm looking at that list on Twitter, I'm seeing all of the other things those people are sharing. And that's important for a number of different reasons. One, I can find the most influential people by adding a couple different filters that show, hey, who's getting the most, retweets or the most likes on this piece of content that's being shared. But more importantly, I'm able to see those other places where those people are spending their time and focus. So that's going to give me an opportunity to say, like, oh, this is a market I want to get in front of. Cool. Well, I might want to guest blog on this site or do a webinar on this site, and really just try to blanket my visibility in these places where my competitor is, or people who are paying attention to my competitor. I want to get in front of those places. Google, a few years ago, they put out the Zero Moment of Truth report. And a lot of and this actually, I might be citing the wrong research here, but the principles behind it are still the same. One of the things when it comes to a customer's perception of a brand is about, and this is, basic marketing stuff, but if you're showing up where your competitors are not, then you have a much better likelihood of flipping brand preferences on that. And they have a lot of research and study behind that. But it's just about being in the right place at the right time and understanding and having a running tally of where these people are spending their focus and then getting in those places. So that's kind of the theory behind that.
Cool. That makes sense. So yeah, great automation, great way to do that, but it starts with great content. And really important, right, to do some amount of research. Not suggesting that everybody can do 30 hours, but certainly some of the stuff that you said, Tommy, is so valuable. So I gotta ask though, man, like, where do you learn this stuff, man? Like, what are you reading? What are you putting in your head to get smarter? So if I want to be like 1% as smart as Tommy Walker, I could possibly do that.
Yeah. So I actually don't read a lot of business stuff. I try to stay away from, the here's how to do YouTube or how to do social media, or like, I really haven't ever gotten into that. I think I maybe read, what is it? Unwork, right? Once or twice, and a handful of business books here and there. But what I really care about is like, I read a lot more filmmaking stuff, right? Filmmaking books, storytelling books, things like that. So if somebody asks me, what's the best books to read, I'll say Save the Cat, and I'll say, Story by Robert McKee. And the reason for that is these are universal principles that are being taught through storytelling that are more important to packaging information than it is the information itself. A lot of the stuff you see out there for content, like I said, it's very surface level, and there's no structure to it. There's no really beginning, middle, and end. There's no like, here's the truth behind what we're trying to get at here. It's a lot of, even the heavily researched stuff, it's like a bunch of data facts thrown at the wall. And the thing that like I said, that I will take a piece of research and move from narrative point to narrative point. So I don't know where that's going to take me next. And that's why it takes so long to write a piece. But what I care about is what that structure of that looks like. So yeah, that's, I think that answers the question.
Yeah, no, that's interesting, right? So packaging the information often more important than the information themselves. So let's unpack that a little bit to your point there, because I do think that the way you package it, I mean, to that point, Tommy, I've read a lot of your work, man, and I always enjoy it. And don't take this wrong way, but I'm not always sure why. Like, not because it's obtuse, but I mean, no, I mean, like, I'm like,
right.
Oh, like I hadn't thought about that, right? Like that's different. I learned something even if I'm not trying to learn something. Like I read it, because I know you, and I read it because, sometimes it pops to my feed. Oh, that Tommy wrote that. Oh, that makes sense, right? But I would say you definitely, I hear your voice. I guess that's really what I'm trying to say, right? Because that's often, for me anyway, that's enjoyable. But that does come because you have a certain style and you have a certain storytelling way. The way you, Tommy Walker, with the Content Studio, packages the information. So talk to me a little more. Let's unpack that a little more about the importance of packaging the information in the right way.
Sure. Kick me off on this one. So for me personally, one of my guiding philosophies, one of the things I tell people I write with and the writers I've developed over time is, and you're starting to hear this more and more now, but I want people to care more about the byline than they do about the headline, right? And And there's a reason, like there are a lot of people who are like, oh, a Stephen King book just came out. I don't care what it is. I'm just going to read Stephen King because Stephen King's awesome. And packaging that information, it kind of goes back to what we were talking about before with simple websites. There's a certain thing that people expect, and then you kind of you sort of try to break their guessing machines, right? If I can take a piece of content and say like, oh, this is what people are assuming that this is going to mean, but then I can take it a level deeper, or I can flip that on its head, or I can debunk certain research, then that's going to be interesting. So a really good example of that is there's that whole like it takes, it's 7 times more expensive to retain or acquire a customer than it is to retain a customer, right? Doing the research on that, I chased that down for days when I was going to use that in a piece because I couldn't cite a source, right? And what I ended up finding in something like in that one little snippet of research was that was a statistic thrown out there by one of the first customer retention platforms back in the 1970s, right? And it was used more as propaganda to get those people to buy the platform than it was an actual like factual based study. So it originated from somebody going, oh, well, yeah, I mean, and intuitively it sounds like it makes sense. So we accept that as something that makes sense. But if I'm not going to take that at face value, and I'm going to dig a little bit deeper and ask better questions, then I can give a more honest response. And then my own personal point of view is grounded in my questioning of the research. And, if I'm in a lot of my style, I guess, is if I see that as BS, I'm going to just call it out. Because I feel like it's kind of a mission. People deserve to be informed, right? On that regard. And then the other thing is like, I'm doing a lot more YouTube now. You saw that one YouTube video I just put out. I feel like my best piece yet. I put that out last week and I'm like very excited about it. I'm trying to do things that are more native to the platform or using a style that's more native to the platform than it is, here's the information, here's my forcing my will on it. I want to take that and present it in a way that a little bit more of a popular style might be. So it's what you expect when you go to YouTube, but it's the packaging of the information, and then I can put the information in a way that's a lot more native to that platform. Yeah.
Yep. Okay. No, that makes sense. And I love your point about the whole byline instead of headline. And that gets us kind of wrapped us back around to, so how do we, how do we do that? I mean, Tommy, not to pick on you, but kind of picking on you, is, your name is Tommy Walker, right? That's a pretty common name. Like Phil Gerbishak, I can easily stand out because that's my name, right? So how do you brand the Tommy Walker brand? I mean, are you branding Content Studio, or what have you done to make sure that when people look for Tommy Walker, that they're looking for you?
Yeah. So if you look for Tommy Walker, if you do a Google search on Tommy Walker, you're actually going to find a Christian rock star. Tommy Walker is a very popular Christian singer. So, and this is one of those things where like I can't rely on Google to do that. So for me, it's all about having a strong voice, right? There's a whole reason, like my branding, my personal branding, and Content Studio is a newer thing. So I'm experimenting with this a little bit more now because eventually I want to sell the company, right? So I'm building out its own brand. But my handle everywhere is Tommy is my name, right? And I try to associate, like it's all about the quality of the work carrying itself. So I don't necessarily know what that means. I don't actually know what my personal brand is, I guess. But it is more about just letting the work speak for itself, right? Like I like that you have, it's like you have signature glasses. Jay Bear has a signature jackets. Everybody's got their kind of thing. I personally don't have a thing, and I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. I've been debating that with myself for years. But yeah, I just try to let my work kind of carry itself. And it seems to have worked because I went in house for several years. When I left Conversion XL, I went to Shopify, and then from Shopify, I went to uh, QuickBooks, and stuff when I moved back onto my own because I was part of a layoff over at QuickBooks. When I went back on my own, my work from 5 years ago, 6 years ago, still helped me like reestablish a foothold out in the marketplace. So yeah, it's just about doing good work, I guess. And in this particular space, Tommy Walker is a very common name, broadly speaking. But in this particular space, there's one Tommy Walker.
Yeah, I think that's a great reminder for folks to really focus on their niche and where they
Yeah.
are, and not worry about the broadness of that. Because yeah, if I'm searching for you, I know to search for Tommy as my name. That's
Right.
what I know, right? But a lot of folks don't. But to that point, right? If we look for marketing, content, writing, stuff like that, conversion type stuff, we're gonna come across the one and only Tommy Walker, which is super good. But your big point there is one that I want to make sure that we drive home, and that is you got to be really good at what you do. You
Yeah.
got to let your work speak for itself, which means you got to put in the work. So,
Yep.
Tommy, if folks are looking to get started on creating better content, I know
Hmm.
that you gave us that great tip about asking better questions, but give us one more tip where we can get started crafting better content so that our work can stand on its own.
Be honest, right? Tell the truth, and do a lot of work. Like the only reason why I ever got as good as I did is because I did a high volume of work. And if I look at the stuff, and this is anything you hear this from a ton of writers, right? Anybody who's ever made it, they'll say the same thing, where it's just do a ton of work and try to make every piece better. When I was hustling and trying to make a couple $100 a piece for the articles that I was doing, it forced me to make each piece better than the one before it, because if I spent a lot of time in editorial, like, and going back into revisions, I was dead, right? I wouldn't have been able to afford a certain bill because I needed to have X amount of dollars by the end of the month just to break even. Um, and that forced me into this place where I did a lot of work, and I always tried to make the one piece better than the next, because if I did a back and forth of 2 to 3 different revisions on a piece, I mean, I already said this, I would have been sunk. So it's always about just doing work, doing more work, and then trying to make the next piece better. And I look at technical things, right? So I guess this would be kind of tip 2B, I guess. Um, oh, where'd you go, Phil? Oh, there we
I'm
go.
trying to shine the light on you, Tommy. Give us tip
Okay.
two, brother.
All right. So tip 2B, I also try to look at things like getting really technical. So how can I have, one piece I might go, how do I not use my subheaders as a ending point and a jumping off point for the next one? Right. So you see this in a lot of blog posts where it's, the it starts a section, you go and you complete the whole idea, you complete the whole thought, you've got a subheader, you start the next idea, and you move to the whole, you go through that entire thought. And as a reader, that feels a lot like a roller coaster, right? I'm going kind of up and down, and I'm constantly starting and stopping. So one thing I might look at when I'm writing an article is, how do I keep a narrative just going straight through, and the subheaders are only emphasizing points, or the next sentence that I'm trying to do, instead of the stopping point. In another piece, I might try to use a little bit more wordplay, right? Use a little bit more crafting of my language, and work on the musicality of a piece to make it stand out a little bit more. There was an intro to an article I wrote for a client. It was kind of silly, but I started it off kind of like a Dr. Seuss poem, right? Because that helps it stand out, and it hooks your reader in the very beginning. I might look at things like, I might focus exclusively on trying to get my lead really solid, or close out my ending to where I can encourage somebody to share, but without asking them to share. I might look at things where, if I want somebody to open 15 different tabs by the time they're done with this one piece, how am I leading up to that one specific link that I want people to share to, from a narrative point of view, not just, hey, click this link, right? So I try to focus on little technical things on each piece to improve these different areas. And one of the things that, one of my sources of inspiration is freestyle rappers, right? There's Harry Mack is this really great freestyle rapper on YouTube. And there's this one video where he talks about practice versus performance. And that's one of the things that he talks about is, as a musician, you practice your drills, you do your scales, right? As an actor, I would do vocal warm-ups, and you have these very technical things that you're focusing on, one thing at a time. You zero in on this. You might suck at it, right? It might be bad, but you're still putting in the effort in these particular very focused areas. Do people out there see it? No. But and as you're building out your body of work, you're trying to figure out these things, these little things that you want to get better at. A good one, right? Talking about letting the work carry itself. A good one is, how can I write a line that somebody's going to quote, right? Like, what's the Twitter quote? How do I say this one thing in 140 characters that I want people to share? Right? How do I make that one point?
Yeah.
Right.
How can I write a line that people are going to share?
Yeah.
Right.
And
That's
just
really good.
and if I can weave in 2 or 3 of those within a piece, right? Little quotables, without necessarily even having to do the little standout, like, people will do that, like, quote this right here. And if people are going to quote it, they're going to quote it. Right. So try to write it in a way that people are going to want to quote it.
That's powerful, man. That's a good way to think about things as we take us out here. So definitely finding ways to be quotable that people want to quote. It's great if you make it stand out, but often you don't have to, because you can make those words sing and stand on their own. I love that you talked about musicality. You talked about theater today. You talked about Save the Cat. And what was the other book by McKee?
Story.
So Save the Cat and Story being some good resources that Tommy recommends, so you can write more story, write more of a narrative, and have content that stands on its own. So Tommy, if people want to find more of you, where do they get connected with you? Where do they find the content studio so they can learn more about you and possibly say, well, holy crap, man, this is way too much work. I need to work with Tommy.
So right now, thecontentstudio.com is where I'm trying to focus all attention. So thecontentstudio.com, if you sign up there, you'll get a drip email of my personal content code. You'll get the introduction on the page, and then you can see over the next, I think it's 10 days, where the content code itself. And then I'm Tommy as my name everywhere, but primarily focused on Twitter and LinkedIn right now is where I'm spending most of my time.
Fantastic. So folks,
and YouTube. And YouTube.
Yeah,
subscribe to my YouTube channel.
Yeah. Absolutely. No, for sure, right? I totally agree. I learn a lot from your YouTube channel. Thecontentstudio.com is where you can get connected with Tommy. And if you want to talk to him, just look for Tommy as my name. Smash that all together on LinkedIn or on Twitter, and you can find the insightful, inspiring, and great storytelling behind Tommy Walker. Tommy, thanks so much, man. It was great to chat from you, great to learn from you. I really appreciate you, man. Good stuff. And thanks everyone for listening, for learning. Now get to work creating content that could stand on itself.